After dedicating 35 years to building my event planning business from nothing, I finally had everything I dreamed of: a successful company, financial security, and a beautiful venue I secretly owned. Then my son told me I was too old and outdated to attend his wedding, never realizing I was the owner of the exclusive location he desperately wanted to book. My name is Eleanor Sullivan, and at 62, I thought I'd seen everything in the event planning business. I started with nothing but determination after my husband left me with a 3-year-old son, Thomas, and mountains of debt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Those early years were a blur of 18-hour days, coordinating small parties during the day, while designing invitations at night, all while raising my son alone. I lived on coffee and determination, transforming a tiny home office into what would eventually become Sullivan Premier Events. Thomas grew up watching me build my business. As a little boy, he'd help me arrange flowers and fold napkins. As a teenager, he'd assist with setups on weekends for extra money. I always thought he was proud of what I'd accomplished, how I'd taken our broken little family and created something beautiful from the ashes. My success meant I could send him to the best schools, support his interests, and eventually help him establish his own marketing career. 5 years ago, when the historic Bellamy Estate went up for sale, a breathtaking property with manicured gardens and a restored 19th century mansion that would make the perfect event venue, I took the biggest financial risk of my life. The purchase nearly drained my retirement savings, but I knew it was a smart investment. I hired a management company to operate it under the name Bellamy Heritage Properties, while I focused on my planning business. Few people knew I was the actual owner, and I preferred it that way. The arrangement gave me passive income while keeping my planning business separate. The Bellamy Estate quickly became the most sought-after wedding venue in the region. The waiting list stretched 2 years out, with couples willing to pay a premium for the elegant space and immaculate grounds. I took secret pride in visiting as a vendor and watching how my investment flourished. I planned to announce my ownership when I retired, perhaps passing it on to Thomas someday. When Thomas called to tell me he was engaged to Rebecca, a corporate attorney from a wealthy family, I was overjoyed. I immediately offered to plan their wedding. After all, what mother wouldn't want to use her lifetime of expertise to create a perfect day for her only child? I envisioned something elegant but personal, something that would honor their relationship, while showcasing my years of experience in creating memorable celebrations. "That's thoughtful, Mom," Thomas said hesitantly over the phone. "But Rebecca has very specific ideas. She's thinking of something more contemporary than your usual style." I brushed off the subtle criticism. "I've designed everything from traditional to ultra-modern events, honey. Just let me know what you're looking for. We'll discuss it and get back to you," he promised. Weeks passed, and I heard nothing about wedding plans. When I called to ask about dates or venues, Thomas would change the subject or say they were still deciding. I respected their space, but couldn't help feeling a growing distance. Thomas had always been my closest confidant, the one person who knew all my struggles and triumphs. Now he seemed to be keeping me at arm's length. Then came Rebecca's family dinner. Thomas insisted I attend to meet her parents, the distinguished Dr. and Mrs. Harrington. The evening at an upscale restaurant was tense from the start. Rebecca's mother assessed me with cool politeness, her eyes lingering on my practical jewelry and sensible shoes. Her father spoke almost exclusively about their family connections and social standing. "So you plan parties?" Mrs. Harrington asked, somehow, making my lifelong profession sound like a charming hobby. "Mom owns Sullivan Premier Events," Thomas interjected quickly. "She's done events for the governor and several celebrities." I appreciated his defense, but noticed how he emphasized my most prestigious clients, as though my worth needed to be proven to these people. The conversation shifted to wedding venues, and Rebecca brightened. "We've found the perfect place, the Bellamy Estate. It's absolutely exclusive. Everyone wants it, but it's nearly impossible to get a date." "The Bellamy?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral. "It's certainly beautiful." "We're on the waiting list," Thomas explained. "Rebecca has her heart set on it, so we're working every connection to try to secure a date next spring." "I might know someone who could help," I offered carefully. Mrs. Harrington's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. "Really? Who might that be?" Before I could answer, Rebecca laughed lightly. "No offense, Eleanor, but the Bellamy is extremely selective. They cater to a certain aesthetic. Very modern, very exclusive." The implication hung in the air. My connections couldn't possibly reach that high. I saw Thomas shift uncomfortably but remain silent. "I understand," I said, sipping my water. "Just thought I might help." The dinner continued with wedding talk that clearly excluded my input. They discussed photographers, florists, and caterers, all chosen without consulting me. I learned they'd hired a young celebrity wedding planner who specialized in innovative concepts and was apparently featured in several high-end magazines. As dessert arrived, Rebecca's mother turned to me with what seemed like genuine curiosity. "Will you be wearing mother-of-the-groom traditional attire, Eleanor? Or something more age-appropriate?" "I haven't given it much thought," I replied honestly. "Well, we should discuss it," she continued. "The wedding palette is very specific, and the photographer mentioned that certain colors don't photograph well on mature skin." I felt Thomas tense beside me, but again, he said nothing. The message was clear. I was being managed, contained, made visually acceptable for their perfect day. After dinner, Thomas walked me to my car while Rebecca stayed behind with her parents. "They mean well, Mom," he said apologetically. "They're just used to a certain way of doing things." "And I'm not part of that way?" I asked quietly. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "It's just, Rebecca and her family are worried you might feel out of place with the kind of wedding we're planning. It's going to be very contemporary, very high-end, not the traditional style you're used to." "I see," I said, keys clutched tightly in my hand. "Mom," he hesitated, then seemed to decide to just say it. "They think you might be more comfortable in a background role, not center stage." The words hit like a physical blow. After everything, the years of sacrifice, building a business while raising him alone, teaching him everything I knew about creating beautiful events, my son thought I wasn't sophisticated enough to stand beside him on his wedding day. I drove home in silence, a plan already forming in my mind. If Thomas and the Harringtons wanted the exclusive Bellamy estate so badly, they would certainly get it, along with a lesson they'd never forget. I wasn't always Eleanor Sullivan, owner of a premier event planning business. For most of my life, I was just Ellie Parker, a small-town girl with big dreams who fell in love too young with a charming man named Jack. We married when I was 23, and Thomas was born a year later. Those early years were happy, if modest. Jack worked in sales while I stayed home with our son, occasionally helping friends arrange parties or small celebrations. The fairy tale ended when Thomas was 3. I came home one afternoon to find Jack's closet empty and a note on our kitchen table. "I can't do this anymore," it read. "The responsibility is too much." Along with his wedding ring, he'd left behind $17,000 in credit card debt, an overdue mortgage, and a confused little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I had no college degree, no substantial work experience, and no family to fall back on. My parents had passed away years earlier, and my only sister lived across the country struggling with her own financial problems. What I did have was a determination that bordered on stubbornness and a natural talent for organization and design. I started small, planning children's birthday parties for neighbors while Thomas played with their kids. I charged barely enough to cover supplies but focused on building a reputation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Word spread about my creative themes and meticulous attention to detail. Soon, local businesses were hiring me for holiday parties and small corporate functions. Those early years were exhausting. I'd work all day, put Thomas to bed, then stay up until 2 a.m. addressing invitations, designing centerpieces, or researching new trends. Our dining room became my workshop, with fabric swatches, paint samples, and sketches covering every surface. I learned everything on the go, negotiating with vendors, managing client expectations, troubleshooting last-minute disasters. There was no room for error when every dollar mattered. Thomas grew up surrounded by my work. As a toddler, he'd sit beside me sorting color swatches or playing with leftover ribbon. When he started school, he'd help me pack supplies or assemble simple decorations. "We're a team," I always told him. "The Sullivan Dream Team." He'd beam with pride when people complimented my events, telling everyone, "My mom made that." By the time Thomas was 10, Sullivan Event Planning had grown enough to warrant a small storefront downtown. I hired my first employee, took out a business loan, and expanded from social gatherings to weddings and larger corporate events. The work was still demanding, but seeing my name on that storefront window made every sacrifice worthwhile. As my business grew, so did my reputation. I became known for creating experiences that were both beautiful and meaningful. Celebrations that reflected the personalities and stories of my clients. I wasn't just arranging flowers or selecting linens. I was crafting moments people would remember for a lifetime. Thomas entered his teenage years as my business hit its stride. I could finally afford to give him opportunities I'd never had. Piano, lessons, summer camps, private school. I worked hard to ensure he never felt the financial strain that had defined our early years together. Perhaps I overcompensated at times, wanting him to have everything his father's abandonment might have taken from him. When Thomas left for college, a prestigious university I was immensely proud to help him afford, I channeled my empty nest energy into expanding the business further. I pursued certification in event management, hired more staff, and began targeting more upscale clients. By the time Thomas graduated with a marketing degree, Sullivan Premier Events had an office in the historic district with a team of 12 full-time employees. Thomas briefly worked for me after college, heading our marketing department for 2 years. Those were some of my favorite times. Watching my son apply his education to the business I'd built, seeing him grasp concepts that had taken me years to learn through trial and error. He brought fresh ideas and technological knowledge that modernized our approach, but I always knew he had ambitions beyond our family business. When he received an offer from a major marketing firm in the city, I encouraged him to take it, despite the pang I felt watching him pack up his office. "You've given this business enough of your life," he said on his last day. "You should think about your retirement soon, Mom. Enjoy the fruits of your labor." I laughed it off, but his words stayed with me. I was in my late 50s then, with no concrete retirement plans. The business was successful, but I'd always reinvested profits into growth rather than building substantial personal savings. I needed something that would provide security for my future, an investment that aligned with my expertise. That's when the Bellamy Estate came on the market. The property had a storied history in our region, a magnificent mansion built in 1885 by a railroad tycoon, surrounded by 5 acres of formal gardens. It had fallen into disrepair under its previous owners, who had lacked the funds for proper maintenance. The asking price was steep, but below market value due to the needed renovations. Saw what others didn't. The perfect bones of an exceptional event venue, the ballroom with its soaring ceilings and original crystal chandeliers, the sweeping staircase ideal for dramatic entrances, the gardens that could be restored to their former glory for outdoor ceremonies. I liquidated investments, took out a substantial loan, and made the purchase that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. The renovation consumed the next year of my life. I worked closely with historical preservation experts, landscapers, and interior designers to restore the estate's grandeur while adding modern amenities. I kept my ownership quiet, establishing a separate LLC called Bellamy Heritage Properties, and hiring a management company to handle day-to-day operations. This arrangement allowed me to maintain my event planning business while developing the venue as an independent entity. When the Bellamy estate reopened, it quickly became the most sought-after venue in the region. Its exclusivity was part of its appeal. Limited availability, premium pricing, and a reputation for unparalleled elegance attracted a high-end clientele. I took immense pride in what I'd created, though few knew it was my vision behind the restoration. I'd planned to reveal my ownership eventually, perhaps when I scaled back my involvement with Sullivan Premier Events. I thought Thomas would be proud of this achievement, a testament to my business acumen and an investment that could eventually become part of his inheritance. Now, sitting in my car after that disastrous dinner with the Harringtons, I wondered if I'd been fooling myself. The son who once proudly told everyone about his mother's creations now seemed embarrassed by my very presence. The child who grew up as my partner in building a business now saw me as outdated, a potential embarrassment at his wedding. As I drove home through the darkened streets, one thought crystallized in my mind. Thomas and his future in-laws would get their wedding at the exclusive Bellamy estate, but it would happen on my terms, and with a revelation they never saw coming. Week after the uncomfortable dinner with the Harringtons, I received an invitation to Sunday brunch at Thomas and Rebecca's apartment. The invitation, a formal text message rather than Thomas's usual casual call, felt oddly stiff, but I was eager to repair whatever damage had been done at dinner. Perhaps they wanted to discuss their wedding plans after all. I arrived promptly, at 11, carrying a basket of freshly baked scones from Thomas's favorite bakery. Rebecca answered the door in a crisp white blouse and tailored pants, her face composed in what I'd come to recognize as her professional smile. "Eleanor, right. On time," she said, accepting the basket with a brief nod. "Thomas is just finishing up a call. Come in." Their apartment reflected Rebecca's minimalist aesthetic. Clean lines, neutral colors, and carefully curated decor that looked straight from a design magazine. No family photos, no personal mementos, just tasteful artwork and strategically placed books that appeared more decorative than read. "Beautiful flowers," I commented, gesturing to an elaborate arrangement on the dining table. "From my mother," Rebecca replied. "She has them delivered weekly. She believes fresh flowers are essential to a well-maintained home." I nodded, thinking of the wildflower garden behind my house that provided blooms for my kitchen table most of the year. Different approaches to the same appreciation. Thomas emerged from the home office, greeting me with a quick hug. "Mom, glad you could make it. Coffee?" The three of us settled at their dining table, where Rebecca had arranged a picture-perfect brunch, avocado toast, fruit parfait, and something that looked like a quinoa bowl. Nothing like the hearty Sunday breakfasts Thomas had grown up with. After a few minutes of polite small talk about work and weather, Rebecca placed her napkin beside her barely touched parfait and straightened in her chair. "Eleanor, we wanted to speak with you about the wedding." The formal tone of her voice put me instantly on alert. "We've managed to make some progress with the Bellamy estate," Thomas continued. "Rebecca's father knows someone on the board of the historical society that consults with the property." "That's wonderful," I said carefully, sipping my coffee. "We're hoping to secure a date next June," Rebecca added. "It's not confirmed yet, but it looks promising." I nodded, wondering when they would get to the real purpose of this brunch. Thomas cleared his throat. "The thing is, Mom, the Bellamy has a very specific aesthetic. Our wedding planner, Zara, has designed a concept that works perfectly with the venue's architecture and gardens. It's very contemporary, very curated. I'm sure it will be beautiful, I offered. The grounds there are perfect for a June wedding. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Eleanor, we've been thinking about the best way for you to be involved. Given your experience with more traditional events, we're concerned you might feel out of place in the planning process. I set my coffee cup down with deliberate care. What exactly are you trying to say, Rebecca? Thomas jumped in, his words coming quickly. What we mean is that Zara has a very specific vision, and too many cooks in the kitchen might complicate things. We thought you'd be more comfortable enjoying the day as a guest rather than feeling responsible for any of the planning details. I see, I said, though I didn't. Not yet. That's fine. I'm happy to simply attend and celebrate with you, Rebecca. And Thomas exchanged a glance that made my stomach tighten. There's one more thing, Thomas said, not quite meeting my eyes. The wedding is going to be featured in Modern Luxury Weddings magazine. They're doing a spread on innovative celebrations at historical venues. That's quite an honor, I said, genuinely impressed despite my growing unease. It is, Rebecca agreed, a note of pride in her voice. But it means everything has to be absolutely perfect. The magazine has certain aesthetic requirements. What Rebecca is trying to say, Thomas interjected, is that they're looking for a very specific visual composition. Everyone in the main wedding party will need to fit certain parameters for the photography. The realization of what they were implying hit me like a physical blow. I sat back in my chair, momentarily speechless. Rebecca continued in her measured, professional tone. Eleanor, we value your role as Thomas's mother, but we've been discussing whether a more background position might be best for the official ceremony and photographs. Background position? I repeated, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Thomas reached across the table as if to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it. Mom, you know I want you there, but this spread could be huge for Rebecca's career at the law firm, and for my marketing portfolio too. The aesthetic consistency is important for the magazine. What Thomas means, Rebecca clarified, is that we're curating a very youthful, modern wedding party aesthetic. The bridesmaids are all under 35, and the groomsmen as well. For the magazine spread, we need a certain cohesive look. You're saying I'm too old to be visibly part of my only son's wedding, I stated flatly. Rebecca flinched slightly at my directness. That's exactly what you're saying, I interrupted, my voice calm despite the emotional storm building inside me. You think I don't fit your aesthetic because of my age? Thomas looked pained. Mom, it's not personal. It's just... What, Thomas? Just business? Just aesthetics? Just your future mother-in-law's preference? Each question landed like a stone between us. It's about creating a cohesive visual narrative, Rebecca explained in her lawyer voice. My parents understand. This, too. They'll be acknowledged in the program and seated prominently, but they won't be in the main photography composition either. At least they get seats, I said quietly. Thomas winced. Mom, of course you'll have a seat. You'll be seated in the family section. You'll attend the reception. You just won't be standing at the altar or in the main photo series. I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the young man I'd sacrificed everything for, and barely recognized him. Somewhere along the way, the values I thought I'd instilled had been replaced by concerns about appearances and social climbing. Let me understand correctly, I said, my voice steady despite my breaking heart. You want me to attend my only child's wedding as essentially a background extra, to sit quietly in the audience while pretending I'm not being deliberately hidden because I might ruin your magazine spread with my wrinkles and gray hair. You're taking this too personally, Rebecca said with a frown. It's about the visual aesthetic, not about you specifically. I stood up, placing my napkin neatly beside my plate. I think we're done here. Mom, please, Thomas said, standing as well. We still want you there. This is just about the official photos and ceremony positioning. I looked at him for a long moment. You know, Thomas, I've spent my entire career helping people create meaningful celebrations, moments that honor relationships and mark significant milestones. Not once in 35 years have I ever advised a client to hide their mother because she might not be photogenic enough. That's not fair, he protested. This is different. Yes, I agreed sadly. It is different, because I never thought my own son would value a magazine spread over my dignity. I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. You should know that I do have connections at the Bellamy estate. Quite good ones, actually. I'll make a call and help you secure your date. Relief washed over Thomas's face. Really? You'd do that? The fact that he could still ask for my help after what had just transpired told me everything I needed to know about how far we'd drifted apart. Of course, I said. You're my son. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has. As I left their apartment and stepped into the bright Sunday morning, I felt strangely calm amid the heartbreak. The decision I'd been wavering about for months suddenly crystallized with perfect clarity. It was time for the owner of the Bellamy estate to make her identity known, just not quite yet. First, Thomas and the Harringtons would learn exactly what they were asking for. The drive home from Thomas and Rebecca's apartment stretched longer than its usual 20 minutes. Every traffic light seemed determined to stop me, forcing moments of stillness where memories flooded in unchecked. Thomas at 7, proudly helping me arrange flowers for his teacher's retirement party. Thomas at 16, staying up until midnight to help me finish an elaborate wedding cake when my assistant called in sick. Thomas at 22, giving a heartfelt toast at my 50th birthday party, calling me his hero. Where had that son gone? When had he transformed into someone who could so casually dismiss me as an embarrassment? I pulled into my driveway, noticing absently that the azaleas needed pruning. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and moved through my comfortable, lived-in home, so different from the sterile perfection of Rebecca and Thomas's apartment. Here were photos documenting our life together, handmade quilts from my mother, books read and loved rather than chosen for their spine color. Sitting at my kitchen table, I called Diane, my closest friend and the operations manager at Sullivan Premier Events. "How was brunch?" she asked after our hellos. "Educational," I replied, the word bitter on my tongue. I recounted the conversation, my voice remaining steady even as I described being deemed too old for proper inclusion in my son's wedding. "Those entitled little—" Diane began, then caught herself. "I'm sorry, Ellie. That's unbelievably hurtful." "The worst part was how reasonable they thought they were being," I said, like they deserved credit for allowing me to attend at all. "What are you going to do?" I sighed, running a hand through my silver-streaked hair. "I promised I'd help them secure the Bellamy. And I will. Just not quite in the way they expect." "You're going to tell them you own it?" "Eventually. But first, I think they need to understand exactly what they're asking for." A plan was forming, something between a lesson and a revelation. Thomas has forgotten some important things about respect and family, about what matters more than appearances. "Be careful, Ellie," Diane cautioned. "You don't want to damage your relationship with him permanently." "I think they're doing that just fine without my help," I replied, more sharply than intended. After a pause, I added, "I won't be vindictive, Di, but I won't be invisible either." After hanging up, I opened my laptop and checked my email. Among the usual business correspondence was a message from Martin Reynolds, the manager I'd hired to run the Bellamy estate. Our quarterly review meeting was scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Perfect timing. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Thanks for understanding today, Mom. Rebecca's already feeling better about things. We really appreciate your help with the Bellamy connection." No apology. No acknowledgement of how hurtful their request had been. Just gratitude that I was falling in line with their plans. I didn't respond. Monday morning, I arrived at my office, earlier than usual, reviewing financial reports before my staff arrived. Sullivan Premier Events was thriving, with bookings secured through the next 18 months. I'd built something remarkable from nothing, a fact that seemed to impress everyone except my own son. Diane arrived bearing coffee and concern. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I had better things to do," I replied, showing her the preliminary sketches I'd worked on until the early hours, designs for an event space renovation at the Bellamy that I'd been contemplating for months. "These are gorgeous," she said, examining the detailed renderings. "But is now the best time to focus on a major renovation, with everything happening with Thomas?" "Now is exactly the right time," I answered. "Sometimes spaces need to evolve to reach their full potential. Sometimes people do too." Throughout the day, I handled client meetings with my usual attentiveness, but my mind kept returning to my afternoon appointment at the Bellamy. By 3 o'clock, I was pulling into the estate's elegant circular driveway, admiring, as always, the graceful facade of the mansion and the immaculate gardens surrounding it. Martin met me in the main office, a converted library that retained its original mahogany shelving and leather furniture. "Mrs. Sullivan, always a pleasure," he greeted me, ever professional despite our 5 years of working together. "I've prepared the quarterly reports as requested." "Thank you, Martin. Before we get to those, I'd like to discuss some changes." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Changes to the property?" "No, to our operating procedures. I understand you've received an inquiry about a wedding booking next June. The couple is Thomas Sullivan and Rebecca Harrington." Martin consulted his tablet. "Yes, they're on our waiting list. Miss Harrington's father has been quite persistent, mentioning his connections to the Historical Society." I smiled thinly. "I'm sure he has. I'd like that booking to be approved, but with some special conditions." "Special conditions?" Martin looked appropriately confused. "Yes. I'll be taking personal oversight of this event. The couple and their families should be given the impression that special accommodations are being made due to their connections, but I'll be making all final decisions about the arrangements." Martin's professional demeanor slipped momentarily. "Mrs. Sullivan, forgive me for asking, but does your son know that you own the Bellamy?" "He does not. And for now, I'd like to keep it that way." "I see." Martin hesitated, then asked carefully, "May I ask why?" I considered how much to share with this man who had competently managed my investment for years, but knew little about my personal life. "My son and his fiancée have some misconceptions about what makes a wedding meaningful," I finally said. "They're focused on creating a perfect image rather than a genuine celebration. They've decided that I'm too old to fit their aesthetic vision." Understanding dawned in Martin's eyes. "And you want to teach them a lesson?" "I want to give them an opportunity to reconsider their priorities," I corrected, though he wasn't entirely wrong. "Sometimes people need to see the consequences of their choices before they can make better ones." "And the special conditions?" I outlined my plan, watching as Martin's expression shifted from professional neutrality to cautious approval. "It's unorthodox," he said when I finished. "But as the owner, it's entirely your prerogative. I'd like to begin by having them come for a tour and preliminary planning session. Perhaps next Monday? And Martin, I'd appreciate it if you'd treat me as a special consultant brought in for this event, not as the owner." "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan. I'll make the arrangements." As I left the Bellamy estate, I felt the first stirrings of something beyond hurt, a renewed sense of purpose. If Thomas and Rebecca wanted the perfect wedding at the perfect venue, they would get exactly that. But on terms they couldn't yet imagine. That evening, Thomas called. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. "Mom, great news. Rebecca's dad just heard from his contact that the Bellamy might have an opening next June. They want us to come in for a meeting next week. Whatever strings you pulled, thank you. Call me back? I texted instead. Glad it worked out. I'll be there too. They've asked me to consult on the planning as a favor to you. His reply came quickly. Really? That's unexpected. Rebecca was planning to work with Zara. The Bellamy has its own procedures. I wrote back. This is part of securing the date. Unless you're not interested anymore? The response took longer this time. No, we definitely want the Bellamy. I'll tell Rebecca you'll be at the meeting as a consultant. Thanks again, Mom. I put my phone down and gazed out at my garden, where evening shadows stretched across the flowers I'd planted and tended over years. Relationships, like gardens, required care and attention. Sometimes they also required pruning, cutting back the unhealthy growth to allow something stronger to emerge. Thomas had forgotten the values I thought I'd instilled in him. Perhaps it was time for a painful but necessary reminder of what truly mattered. Not appearances or magazine spreads, but the authentic connections between people who loved each other, wrinkles, gray hair, and all. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake in the darkness, replaying that brunch conversation in my mind. Each remembered word stung afresh: aesthetic consistency, background position, visual narrative. Such carefully chosen terminology to disguise the simple, hurtful truth. My son and his fiancée were ashamed of how I looked. Around 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep altogether. Wrapping myself in my favorite cardigan, I padded downstairs to the kitchen and made a cup of chamomile tea. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creaking of the old wooden floors, a sound Thomas used to say was the house talking to us when he was little. I found myself in the spare bedroom that doubled as storage for family memorabilia. Opening an old cedar chest, I pulled out Thomas's baby album. There we were in the hospital, me looking exhausted but radiant, cradling my newborn son. Later pages showed his first steps, birthday parties, school plays, all the milestones I'd documented so carefully. In nearly every photo, we were together. The Sullivan Dream Team. One picture in particular caught my attention. Thomas, at about 12, standing proudly beside me at his school's career day. I'd given a presentation about event planning, bringing samples of invitations and miniature table settings. In the photo, Thomas had his arm around my waist, grinning widely. The caption, written in his childish scrawl, read, "Me and Mom, the best team ever." When had that proud boy turned into a man who saw me as an embarrassment? What had I missed in his growing up that allowed such a fundamental shift in values? Setting the album aside, I noticed Thomas's old sketchbook on a nearby shelf. He'd gone through an artistic phase in high school, showing genuine talent before marketing captured his interest. I flipped through pages of drawings, landscapes, still lifes, and several portraits of me. In one, I was arranging flowers, my face focused in concentration. In another, I was laughing, head thrown back in genuine joy. He'd captured something essential about me in those sketches, a vitality and presence that had nothing to do with age or appearance. The contrast between those loving portraits and his current attitude toward me was jarring. It wasn't just the request to stay in the background that hurt. It was the realization that my son had adopted values so contrary to everything I thought I'd taught him. Somehow, the genuine appreciation for substance over style, for character over appearance, had been lost. By dawn, my sadness had crystallized into something more complex, a mixture of hurt, disappointment, and determination. I showered and dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored pantsuit in deep teal that I knew brought out the color of my eyes. I might be 62, but I wasn't going to hide in beige. At the office, I buried myself in work, finalizing details for an upcoming charity gala. Diane watched me with concern, but knew better than to press. Around midday, she placed a sandwich, beside my keyboard. "You need to eat," she said simply. I glanced up from my computer. "I'm not hungry." It wasn't a question. She sat in the chair across from my desk. "How are you really doing, Ellie?" I set down my pen and considered the question. I keep thinking about all the times I put Thomas first. The client meetings I rescheduled to attend his soccer games. The night I stayed up retyping his term paper after his computer crashed. The business trips I declined because they conflicted with his school events. I shook my head. I never once thought of any of it as a sacrifice. It was just being his mother. "You were a wonderful mother," Diane affirmed. "You still are." Then why does it feel like I failed somehow? Like I raised someone who cares more about appearances than substance? Diane considered this. Maybe it's not about your parenting. People change when they enter different social circles. Rebecca and her family clearly have a strong influence on him. But shouldn't his core values be more resilient than that? I unwrapped the sandwich absently. I keep thinking about my mother. She was so proud of her wrinkles. She used to say they were evidence of a life well lived. Laugh lines from joy, worry lines from caring deeply. Your mother was a wise woman. She would be so disappointed in Thomas right now. The realization brought fresh pain. And in me, for raising someone who could be so shallow. Don't do that to yourself, Ellie. Diane's voice was firm. Thomas is an adult making his own choices. And this plan of yours, it's not just about getting back at him, is it? I met her gaze directly. No, it's about helping him remember who he is, who we were together. Before he makes a mistake he'll regret for the rest of his life. The mistake being becoming someone he's not, trading authenticity for status. I took a bite of sandwich, suddenly realizing I was hungry after all. Or maybe I'm just a foolish old woman who can't accept that her son has outgrown her. You're many things, Eleanor Sullivan, but foolish isn't one of them. That afternoon, I received an email confirmation of Monday's appointment at the Bellamy estate. Martin had copied Thomas and Rebecca, along with Rebecca's parents, writing that the estate was pleased to accommodate this special consultation regarding a potential June booking. He'd added that Mrs. Sullivan will be joining as a professional, courtesy, given her extensive experience with the venue. Minutes later, my phone rang. Rebecca. "Eleanor," she began without preamble. "We received the email about Monday's meeting at the Bellamy. Thomas mentioned you'd be there as some sort of consultant." "That's right," I confirmed, keeping my tone pleasantly professional. "The Bellamy occasionally brings me in for special events. I've worked with them for years." "I see." Her tone suggested she didn't see at all. "Well, we're working with Zara Patel for our planning. She's quite in demand. Perhaps you've heard of her? She's done several celebrity weddings recently." "The name sounds familiar," I lied smoothly. I knew exactly who Zara was, a talented but inexperienced planner who specialized in Instagram-worthy setups that photographed beautifully but often lacked practical functionality. "We're hoping to keep our vision intact," Rebecca continued. "The Bellamy is perfect for the modern classic aesthetic we're creating." "I'm sure the Bellamy will do everything possible to accommodate your vision," I assured her. "I'll be there. Purely in an advisory capacity." "Wonderful. And Eleanor," she hesitated, "about Sunday's conversation. I hope you understand we weren't trying to exclude you. It's just that this feature is so important for both our careers." The non-apology stung. "I understand exactly what you were saying, Rebecca." The silence that followed suggested she caught my meaning. "Well, we'll see you Monday then. 1 o'clock. After hanging up, I sat motionless, staring at the phone. The conversation confirmed what I already suspected. Rebecca saw me as an obstacle to overcome, not as Thomas's mother deserving of respect. Sadness washed over me anew, but beneath it was a strengthening resolve. I would not allow myself to be diminished for someone else's comfort or convenience. Not after the life I'd built. Not after everything I'd overcome. That evening, I canceled my usual dinner plans with friends and drove instead to the Bellamy estate. The property was closed to the public after 6 p.m., but as the owner, I had full access. I wanted to walk the grounds alone, to reconnect with what this place meant to me. Twilight softened the formal gardens as I strolled the paths I knew by heart. The wisteria-covered pergola where countless couples had exchanged vows. The reflecting pool where floating candles created magic on summer evenings. The rose garden I'd restored using varieties documented in the estate's original landscape plans. Every corner of this property held my vision, my decisions, my investment of both money and care. Like my business, like my son, the Bellamy represented a dream I'd nurtured into reality. I'd never expected gratitude from a building, of course, but I had expected it from my son. Standing on the terrace overlooking the gardens, I made a decision. I would not be playing the role of consultant on Monday. It was time for Eleanor Sullivan, owner of the Bellamy estate, to make her first official appearance. The revelation might shock Thomas. It might enrage Rebecca and her status-conscious parents. But pretending to be less than I was, that was a compromise I was no longer willing to make. Not for a magazine spread, not for social climbing. Not even for my son's momentary comfort. Whatever happened next, I would face it as my authentic self, silver hair, earned wrinkles, and all. Monday arrived with a clarity that follows decisive action. I chose my outfit with deliberate care. Aichi, burgundy suit that projected confidence and authority, accented with a vintage brooch my mother had left me. My only concession to vanity was a touch more makeup than usual. Not to appear younger, but to ensure I looked my best for what would undoubtedly be a challenging encounter. I arrived at the Bellamy 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting, finding Martin waiting in the main foyer. "Everything is prepared as you requested, Mrs. Sullivan," he informed me. "The contracts are in the library, along with the portfolio of available options." "Thank you, Martin. Has anything changed about our plan?" He hesitated. "I received a call from Miss Harrington this morning. She asked about bringing their wedding planner, Zara Patel, to the meeting. I informed her that today's discussion was specifically for the potential clients and yourself as our consultant." I nodded. "Good. And she accepted that?" "With reluctance. She also inquired about who would have final authority on design decisions for their event." "And what did you tell her?" Martin's professional demeanor cracked slightly with a small smile. I explained that while the Bellamy values creative collaboration, certain aspects of the property are subject to management approval for historical preservation reasons. "Perfect. Any word from Thomas directly?" "No, Mrs. Sullivan." I glanced at my watch. "They should be arriving soon. Would you send them to the main salon rather than the library? I think that setting will be more appropriate for what I have in mind." Martin nodded and departed, leaving me alone in the foyer. I took a moment to absorb the grandeur of the space, the sweeping staircase, the original crystal chandelier, the marble floors that had been carefully restored under my direction. Every detail reflected choices I had made as the property's owner. Today, Thomas would finally learn that truth. At precisely 1 o'clock, I heard car doors closing in the circular drive. I moved to the salon, taking a seat in one of the antique chairs positioned to face the entrance. Through the tall windows, I could see Thomas emerging from his car, followed by Rebecca and her parents. They paused to admire the facade of the mansion, Rebecca pointing excitedly at architectural details while her father nodded approvingly. Martin greeted them at the door with perfect professional courtesy, his voice carrying down the hallway as he welcomed them to the Bellamy estate. I heard Rebecca's mother commenting on the exquisite preservation of the original features. If only she knew who had supervised every aspect of that preservation. When Martin led them into the salon, I stood to greet them. Thomas smiled briefly at me before turning his attention to Martin, clearly expecting him to lead the discussion. Rebecca nodded coolly in my direction, while her parents regarded me with polite curiosity. "Welcome to the Bellamy Estate," Martin began. "We're delighted you're considering our venue for your special day. Before we discuss the specifics of your event, there's someone I believe you should meet properly." He gestured toward me. "While Mrs. Sullivan has been introduced as a consultant, her actual role is somewhat more significant." Thomas's eyes darted to me, confusion evident in his expression. "Mrs. Sullivan is in fact the owner of the Bellamy Estate," Martin continued smoothly. "She purchased the property 5 years ago and personally oversaw its restoration and conversion into the premier event venue it is today." The silence that followed was absolute. Thomas stared at me, his face draining of color as understanding dawned. Rebecca's perfectly maintained composure slipped momentarily, her mouth forming a small O of surprise. Her parents exchanged rapid glances, reassessing me with newfound interest. "Mom?" Thomas finally managed. "You own this place?" I met his gaze directly. "Yes, Thomas, I do." "But how? When? Why didn't you tell me?" "I purchased it as an investment for my retirement," I explained, keeping my voice level. "The restoration was completed 3 years ago. As for why I didn't tell you, initially I wanted to establish the venue's reputation independently of Sullivan Premier Events. More recently, I paused, letting the implication hang in the air between us. Rebecca recovered first, her legal training evident in how quickly she adjusted to this new reality. "This is quite a surprise, Eleanor. When Thomas said you had connections here, we had no idea the connection was so direct." "Yes," I agreed pleasantly. "Quite direct indeed." Mr. Harrington stepped forward, hand extended, his entire demeanor transformed. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is truly remarkable. The work you've done with this property is extraordinary. We had no idea we were in the presence of such a successful businesswoman." The sudden shift from dismissive tolerance to fawning respect would have been amusing if it weren't so transparently self-serving. I accepted his handshake with cool politeness. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. The Bellamy has been a labor of love." "Please call me Richard," he insisted, now all charm. "And this is my wife, Margaret." Margaret Harrington had recovered her composure as well, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Eleanor, what a clever investment. You must tell us how you managed to acquire such a prestigious property." "Perhaps another time," I replied, turning to Martin. "Would you mind bringing the portfolio and contracts from the library? I believe we're ready to discuss specifics now." As Martin left to retrieve the materials, an uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Thomas hadn't moved or spoken since the revelation, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Why don't we all sit down?" I suggested, gesturing to the seating arrangement. "We have quite a bit to discuss regarding your wedding plans." Rebecca took Thomas's arm, guiding him to a love seat while her parents chose chairs opposite mine. The power dynamic in the room had shifted palpably, and everyone except Thomas seemed to be rapidly recalculating their approach. When Martin returned with the materials, I began the discussion as I would with any potential clients. "As you know, the Bellamy Estate is in high demand, particularly for the June date you're interested in. However, given the circumstances, I've set that date aside pending our discussion today." "That's extremely generous," Richard Harrington said with newfound deference. "We're grateful for your consideration." I nodded acknowledgement, but focused on Thomas, who still hadn't spoken. "The Bellamy offers several different wedding packages. Each can be customized to reflect the couple's preferences while respecting the historical integrity of the property. Our wedding planner Zara had some specific ideas," Rebecca began. "I'm familiar with Zara's work," I interrupted gently. "While she's certainly talented, The Bellamy requires experienced vendors who understand the property's unique requirements. We maintain a list of approved planners who have demonstrated their ability to work within our guidelines. Rebecca's carefully plucked eyebrows drew together. Is Zara not on that list? I'm afraid not, I replied. But I'd be happy to provide recommendations for planners who are. Perhaps, Margaret Harrington interjected smoothly. Given your obvious expertise, Eleanor, you might consider handling the planning yourself? I'm sure no one knows this venue better than its owner. The suggestion was so transparent I nearly laughed aloud. Just days ago, these people had deemed me too old and outdated to be visible at my son's wedding. Now that they knew I controlled the venue they desperately wanted, suddenly my experience was valuable. That's a generous offer, Margaret, but I don't think that would be appropriate. I turned to Thomas, who finally met my gaze. After all, I understand you're looking for a very specific aesthetic for your wedding. Something modern, youthful, and photogenic for the magazine spread. I wouldn't want how did you put it? My outdated perspective to interfere with your vision. Thomas flinched at hearing his own words reflected back to him. Mom, I should also mention, I continued, not yet ready to let him speak, that, as the venue owner, I do have certain non-negotiable requirements for events held here. Among them is my presence at any meeting regarding design decisions. I trust that won't conflict with your plans for a background position for anyone who might not fit your preferred aesthetic. The color that had drained from Thomas's face now returned, as a flush of shame. Rebecca looked at him questioningly, clearly not understanding the references. There appears to be some misunderstanding, Richard Harrington said cautiously. Of course we would welcome your input on all aspects of the wedding, Eleanor. Your experience would be invaluable. Would it? I asked, my voice still pleasant, but with an edge that couldn't be missed. Because at our last discussion, I was given the impression that my age made me unsuitable for visible inclusion in this event. Margaret Harrington's eyes widened slightly. I'm sure there's been some confusion. We've always respected your relationship to Thomas. My relationship, I repeated slowly. You mean as his mother? The woman who raised him alone after his father abandoned us? The woman who built a business from nothing to provide him with opportunities and security? That relationship? The tension in the room thickened. Thomas finally found his voice, though it emerged strangled with emotion. Mom, please. Can we talk about this privately? I regarded him steadily, seeing both the man he had become and the boy I had raised. Yes, Thomas, I think we should. Martin, would you mind showing the Harringtons the gardens while my son and I have a conversation? Martin, ever professional despite the dramatic scene unfolding, promptly offered to conduct a tour. The Harringtons, clearly relieved at the escape opportunity, followed him from the room, leaving Thomas and me alone in the salon. The confrontation I had both dreaded and needed was finally at hand. After the door closed behind the Harringtons, Thomas and I remained in silence for a long moment. He stood by the window, silhouetted against the garden view, his posture rigid with tension. I stayed seated, allowing him the space to process everything that had just happened. You own the Bellamy, he finally said, his voice low and stunned. All this time you owned it. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? He turned to face me, his expression a complex mixture of confusion, hurt, and embarrassment. I was going to, I replied honestly. Initially, I kept it quiet because I wanted to establish the venue's reputation on its own merits, not as an extension of Sullivan Premier events. Then it just became easier not to mention it. Easier? Mom, this is huge. This place is... He gestured around at the elegant salon, the perfectly restored moldings, the gleaming hardwood floors. It's incredible. It must have cost a significant portion of my retirement savings? Yes, it did. It was an investment in my future. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. I don't understand why you wouldn't share something this important with me. I was planning to tell you eventually, I said. But then you met Rebecca, and suddenly there seemed to be parts of my life you were less interested in knowing about. His eyes dropped to the floor. That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward slightly. Thomas, when was the last time you asked me about my business? About my plans for the future? About anything in my life that didn't directly relate to what I could do for you? The question hung between us, unanswered and damning. And then, of course, there was Sunday's brunch, I continued, my voice quieter now. Where I learned that I was too old and visually unappealing to be properly included in your wedding? Mom, that's not what we meant. It's exactly what you meant, I interrupted, my calm finally slipping. You and Rebecca and her parents made it perfectly clear that I didn't fit your aesthetic vision, that my presence would detract from the, perfect magazine spread you're hoping for. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. It came out wrong. Did it? Because it seemed very deliberately worded to me. Very carefully explained that my role should be minimized for the sake of visual cohesion. The hurt I'd been containing broke through, making my voice tremble slightly. Do you have any idea how that felt? To hear my own son suggest I should be hidden away because I'm too old to be photogenic enough? I never said. You didn't have to say it explicitly. It was implicit in every carefully chosen word. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. The son I raised would never have judged someone's worth by their appearance or age. He would never have placed a magazine spread above treating people with dignity and respect. Thomas moved from the window to sit across from me, his face troubled. It's complicated, Mom. This wedding is important for both our careers. Rebecca's firm is very image-conscious, and my marketing portfolio would benefit significantly from the feature. So, I've heard. Repeatedly. I shook my head. What I haven't heard is anything about love, or commitment, or building a life together based on mutual respect and shared values. Of course we love each other, Thomas protested, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt. Perhaps, or recognition. Do you? Because from what I've seen, you love what she represents. Status, connections, a certain lifestyle. And she loves what you could become with the right polishing. The words were harsh, but I couldn't hold them back any longer. Thomas, when did appearances become more important to you than substance? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting to the formal gardens visible through the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. Things are different now, Mom. Social media, personal branding. It all matters for career advancement. Rebecca understands that world. And I don't. I finished for him. Because I'm just an old woman who built a successful business through hard work and integrity rather than Instagram filters. That's not what He stopped, sighing heavily. I don't know how we got here. We got here one compromise at a time, I said gently. One small surrender of your authentic self after another, until you became someone who could look his mother in the eye and tell her she doesn't fit the aesthetic of his wedding. Thomas winced. When you put it that way. How else should I put it? He was silent again, a battle visibly waging behind his eyes. So what happens now? Are you going to refuse to let us have the wedding here? Is that why you kept your ownership secret until now? To make some kind of point? The accusation stung, but I understood it came from his own shame. No, Thomas. I didn't plan this revelation as some elaborate revenge scheme. I kept my ownership quiet because it was my business decision to make. I revealed it today because I refuse to pretend to be less than I am to make you and the Harringtons comfortable. So the venue is still available to us? I studied my son's face. The face I knew better than my own, now etched with unfamiliar lines of status anxiety and social climbing. The venue is available, yes, With conditions. His shoulders tensed. What conditions? First, I will have approval over all vendors, including the wedding planner. Second, I will be involved in all major design decisions as the venue owner. And third, I paused, holding his gaze steadily. I will be fully and visibly included in your wedding as your mother, not hidden away to preserve some artificial aesthetic. Thomas's expression shifted through several emotions: frustration, calculation, and finally, a hint of the recognition I'd been hoping for. And if we don't agree to those terms? Then you're welcome to book another venue, I answered simply. One where you won't have to worry about including an unfashionably aged mother in your perfect photos. The bluntness of my reply seemed to break through something in him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head bowed slightly. I've really messed up, haven't I? It was the first genuine moment between us in months, and it loosened something tight in my chest. Yes, you have. I never meant to hurt you, Mom. Things with Rebecca's family, it's like entering a different world. Everything is about appearances and connections. I got caught up in it. I noticed, I said dryly, but with less edge than before. Thomas looked up, meeting my eyes directly for what felt like the first time in ages. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Really sorry. What we said at brunch was inexcusable. The apology was a start, but we both knew it wasn't enough. Thank you for saying that. But Thomas, I'm not just hurt by what you said on Sunday. I'm concerned about the person you're becoming. Someone who would even think those things. Let alone say them. He didn't deny it, which gave me a flicker of hope. Perhaps the son I'd raised wasn't entirely lost after all. So where do we go from here? He asked. That depends on what you want more. The perfect-looking wedding that obscures your mother's existence, or an authentic celebration that honors the relationships that actually matter. Before Thomas could answer, the salon door opened to readmit the Harringtons, their tour of the gardens apparently concluded. I could see from their carefully composed expressions that they'd been strategizing during their absence. Rebecca immediately moved to Thomas's side, her hand possessively on his shoulder. The gardens are absolutely stunning, Thomas. I can already envision our ceremony under that beautiful pergola. Richard Harrington stepped forward, all business charm. Eleanor, I believe we may have started on the wrong foot. Margaret and I want to assure you that we have the utmost respect for your relationship with Thomas and your obvious business acumen. Whatever misunderstandings have occurred, I'm sure we can work through them like the family we're about to become. Family. The word hung in the air between us like a question mark. Was that what they were offering? Or just another calculated move to secure the venue they wanted? Before I could respond, Martin returned with refreshments and the contracts we'd need to proceed if Thomas and Rebecca decided to book the Bellamy. The moment of truth had arrived. Would Thomas choose the path of authenticity or continue down the road of appearances and social climbing? I watched my son carefully, wondering which version of him would make this crucial decision. Martin arranged a silver tea service on the inlaid mahogany table, the fine china cups clinking softly as he set them down. The formality of the refreshments seemed to underscore the tension in the room. No one reached for the tea. Perhaps we should continue our discussion, I suggested, breaking the uncomfortable silence. As I was explaining to Thomas, the Bellamy is available for your June date, with certain conditions that reflect our standard policies. Margaret Harrington's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We're sure any conditions would be reasonable, given the circumstances. The carefully chosen phrase, given the circumstances, wasn't lost on me. The implication was clear. They expected special treatment now that they knew I was Thomas's mother. Our first condition involves approved vendors, I continued, ignoring the implication. The Bellamy maintains a curated list of professionals who understand the unique requirements of a historical property. All vendors must come from this list. Rebecca's posture stiffened. Including the wedding planner? Especially the wedding planner, I confirmed. The coordinator is essential in ensuring all aspects of the event respect the venue's guidelines. But we've already engaged Zara, Rebecca protested. She's been working on concepts for months. I understand, but I'm afraid this isn't negotiable. However, I added, seeing her expression darken, Zara is welcome to collaborate with one of our approved planners if that would help preserve elements of your vision. Rebecca looked to Thomas expectantly, clearly assuming he would intervene on her behalf. Thomas, however, seemed unusually thoughtful, his earlier defensiveness replaced by something more reflective. What other conditions are there, Mom? He asked quietly. As the owner, I require involvement in all major design decisions, I said. Not to override your preferences, but to ensure compatibility with the property. Richard Harrington nodded reasonably. That seems fair. The Bellamy's reputation for excellence must be maintained. And finally, I continued, meeting Thomas's eyes directly, I will attend all planning meetings and will be fully included in the wedding as the mother of the groom, visible, present, and recognized. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. Rebecca's eyes narrowed and she exchanged a quick glance with her mother. Of course you'll be included, Eleanor, Margaret said with practiced warmth. We never suggested otherwise. Actually, Thomas interrupted, surprising everyone. We did. At Sunday's brunch, we told Mom she should take a background position because she didn't fit our aesthetic for the magazine spread. His candor seemed to stun the Harringtons. Rebecca's cheeks flushed pink. Thomas, she hissed. This isn't the time. No, it is the time, he countered, straightening in his seat. My mother deserves an apology from all of us, but especially from me. What we said was hurtful and wrong. I hadn't expected this, certainly not so soon. A complicated mixture of emotions washed through me. Pride in Thomas's moment of integrity, cautious hope that he might be remembering his true self, and wariness that this might be a strategic performance for the sake of securing the venue. Richard Harrington, ever the diplomat, stepped smoothly into the awkward moment. If there have been any misunderstandings or insensitivities on our part, Eleanor, we sincerely apologize. Of course, you should be prominently included in your son's wedding. Perhaps in our enthusiasm for the magazine feature, we became too focused on superficial aspects. It was a masterful non-apology, acknowledging misunderstandings without admitting actual wrongdoing, while subtly shifting blame to the magazine's requirements rather than their own prejudices. Thank you, Richard, I replied neutrally. I appreciate your clarification. Rebecca, less practiced in the art of diplomatic evasion than her father, couldn't contain her frustration. This is becoming unnecessarily complicated. We simply want to create a beautiful wedding that reflects our tastes and enhances our professional image. Is that so unreasonable? There's nothing unreasonable about wanting a beautiful wedding, I agreed. What's unreasonable is treating people as accessories to be displayed or hidden based on how well they complement your color scheme. Thomas winced at the directness of my response but didn't contradict it. I think we're getting off track, Margaret interjected smoothly. We all want the same thing, a wonderful celebration for Thomas and Rebecca. The Bellamy is clearly the perfect setting, and now that we understand the family connection, I'm sure we can work together harmoniously. Her artificial pleasantness grated on me. To be clear, Mrs. Harrington, the family connection doesn't change the Bellamy's policies. The conditions I've outlined apply to all events held here, regardless of who is hosting them. Of course, she replied, her smile never wavering. We wouldn't expect special treatment. The blatant dishonesty of this statement hung in the air between us. Of course they expected special treatment. They'd been angling for it from the moment they learned I owned the venue. Martin, sensing the mounting tension, intervened with perfect professional timing. Perhaps this would be a good moment to review. The contract details? The June date requires a 50% deposit to secure. with the balance due 60 days before the event. Rebecca brightened at this shift to practical matters. Yes, let's discuss the details. Daddy will be handling the financial arrangements, of course. Actually, Thomas said, I'd like to contribute to the costs as well. It's our wedding, after all. This statement earned him a sharp look from Rebecca that spoke volumes about previously arranged financial expectations. Martin opened the contract folder. The base fee for a Saturday in June is $45,000, which includes exclusive use of the property for 12 hours, basic staffing, tables and chairs, and standard lighting packages. Richard Harrington nodded, seemingly untroubled by the figure. And additional services? Catering, floral, entertainment? Those are contracted separately with approved vendors, Martin explained. The Bellamy requires a minimum catering package of $200 per guest, and we recommend allocating at least $15,000 for floral designs appropriate to the space. As Martin continued outlining costs, I watched Rebecca whispering intently to Thomas, her expression increasingly agitated. Thomas responded with short, hushed replies, his jaw tightening visibly. The conflict that had begun so personally between Thomas and me was now expanding to include his relationship with Rebecca, exactly what I had feared and hoped to avoid. Yet I couldn't help feeling that this tension was revealing important truths that needed to surface before marriage, not after. One additional policy to note, I interjected when Martin paused, is our approach to media coverage. While we allow photography and limited videography, we maintain approval rights over all images used in publications, including magazines. Rebecca's head snapped up. That would interfere with our arrangement with Modern Luxury Weddings. They require complete editorial control. I'm afraid that's not negotiable, I replied calmly. The Bellamy's reputation and presentation are essential to our business model. But the magazine spread is a centerpiece of our planning, she protested. It's why we selected the Bellamy in the first place, for the prestige and exposure. Her admission was telling. They'd chosen the venue not for its beauty or meaning, but for how it would photograph and what it would communicate about their social status. Thomas was watching me closely, his expression unreadable. Is there room for compromise on this point, Mom? We can certainly discuss parameters that might satisfy both parties, I conceded. But I won't sacrifice the Bellamy standards for a photo shoot. Rebecca stood abruptly. I need to make a call. Excuse me for a moment. She left the salon, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor of the foyer beyond. An uncomfortable silence descended in her absence. Perhaps we should take a short break, Margaret suggested with forced brightness. Richard, why don't we explore that lovely library we passed earlier? After the Harringtons departed, Thomas and I were alone again, the half-empty teacups and open contract creating an oddly intimate tableau between us. You're not making this easy, he said quietly. Did you expect me to? Honestly, part of me did. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The rest of me knows I don't deserve any concessions after how I've acted. I studied my son's face, trying to separate the authentic Thomas from the person he'd been pretending to be. Is this wedding what you truly want, Thomas? Not just the venue or the magazine spread, but marrying Rebecca, joining her family, building a life on their terms? His hesitation spoke volumes. I love her, he finally said, but the declaration sounded more like a reminder to himself than a confident assertion. That doesn't answer my question. Before he could respond, Rebecca returned, her expression triumphant. I spoke with my contact at the magazine. They're willing to share approval rights for images if we can guarantee certain aesthetic elements remain intact. Which elements? I asked. The modern, youthful composition we discussed. She replied smoothly. The magazine is particularly interested in the contrast between contemporary styling and the historical setting. The euphemisms were back, carefully disguising her continued intention to minimize my presence. The brief hope I'd felt at Thomas's apology began to fade. The Harringtons returned as well, with Richard immediately taking charge of the conversation. Eleanor, after considering your conditions, we're prepared to move forward with booking the Bellamy, with one additional request of our own. And what would that be? Given your relationship to Thomas, we think it would be appropriate for you to offer the family discount that I understand is sometimes extended to the Bellamy's most valued clients. The naked opportunism of the request was breathtaking. Not an hour ago, these people had considered me barely worth acknowledging. Now that they knew I controlled something they wanted, they were not only expecting my full cooperation, but also a financial concession. I glanced at Thomas, wondering if he would recognize the audacity of his future father-in-law's request. His expression had hardened, but whether in embarrassment or support of the Harringtons, I couldn't tell. The next few minutes would reveal whether our relationship could be salvaged, or if the gulf between us had grown too wide to bridge. A family discount. I repeated the words slowly, testing their weight. That's an interesting request, Richard. It's quite standard practice, he replied with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Professional courtesy, especially given the circumstances. And what circumstances would those be? I asked, though I knew perfectly well what he meant. Richard gestured vaguely between Thomas and me. The family connection, of course. It would be unusual not to acknowledge it in some way. I see. I set my teacup down with deliberate care. Just to be clear, you believe I should offer a discount on my business services because Thomas is my son? Precisely. Richard beamed, as if pleased I'd grasped his logic. The same son who, until 30 minutes ago, you all agreed should be kept away from the main wedding photographs because I was too old and visually unsuitable? The bluntness of my response caused Margaret to nearly choke on her tea. Thomas stared at the floor, his face flushed with what I hoped was shame. Richard's smile dimmed only slightly. Eleanor, I think we've established that was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Water under the bridge now. Is it? I kept my voice even despite the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Because from where I sit, it seems you've simply pivoted. From finding me embarrassingly old to finding me potentially useful. Neither perspective suggests much respect for me as a person or as a professional. The salon fell silent. Even Martin, standing unobtrusively by the door, seemed to be holding his breath. Rebecca broke the tension, addressing Thomas rather than me. This is becoming ridiculous. Your mother is clearly trying to make everything difficult because her feelings were hurt. Can't you do something? Thomas looked up, his expression conflicted. What would you suggest I do, Rebecca? Talk to her. Make her understand how important this is. Rebecca's composure was slipping, her voice taking on a shrill edge. This is our wedding, our future. She's being completely unreasonable. Is she? Thomas asked quietly, surprising everyone in the room, including me. Because from where I'm sitting, Mom has offered us her venue at the standard rate, with the standard policies. The only thing she's insisting on is being treated with basic respect. Rebecca stared at him as if he'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Whose side are you on? I wasn't aware we needed sides, Thomas replied, a new steadiness in his voice that made my heart leap with cautious hope. Mom owns this venue. She built it, just like she built her event planning business, just like she raised me on her own, while working 18-hour days to make sure I had everything I needed. If she says these are the policies, then these are the policies. Richard Harrington's pleasant facade finally cracked. Now, listen here, young man. We're making a considerable investment in this wedding, an investment in your future together. A little flexibility from your mother seems like the very least she could offer. Actually, I interjected, from a business perspective, the least I could offer is exactly what I'm offering. Standard terms for standard service. The family discount you're requesting would be preferential treatment based solely on personal connection, which goes against everything I've built my reputation on. This is absurd, Margaret declared, setting down her teacup with more force than necessary. You're putting business principles ahead of your own son's wedding? No, I corrected her. I'm refusing to allow my son's wedding to become a transaction. Where my value is determined by what discount I'm willing to provide. Rebecca turned to Thomas, her voice low but not quiet enough to be private. I told you this wouldn't work. We should have just booked the Ritz like Daddy suggested. If you preferred the Ritz, you shouldn't have insisted on the Bellamy, Thomas responded, an edge creeping into his voice. I wanted the Bellamy because it was exclusive, because it would make the perfect backdrop for the magazine, Rebecca snapped, her careful poise finally deserting her. Now we're stuck dealing with your mother's power trip. The words hung in the air, exposing the ugly truth that until now had been carefully couched in euphemisms and polite fictions. Rebecca had never wanted the Bellamy for its beauty or history, only for the status it would confer and how it would photograph. Thomas stood up slowly, his face set in lines I hadn't seen before. I think we need a moment, Rebecca. What we need is to decide if we're booking this venue or not, she countered. The magazine deadline is approaching, and we need to secure the location. The magazine deadline, Thomas repeated. Not our wedding date, not our marriage. The magazine deadline. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. Don't start this again. We've talked about how important this feature is for both our careers. Yes, we have. Many times. Thomas's voice had a new quality to it. Reflective, almost sad. But I don't think we've talked enough about what's important for us as people, not just as careers. Richard Harrington stepped forward, clearly sensing the conversation was veering away from the outcome they wanted. Let's all take a breath. Eleanor, perhaps we started off on the wrong foot with the discount request. We're prepared to pay the full rate, of course. Now, about those vendor restrictions. Surely there's room for flexibility there. I watched my son carefully, seeing something shift in his expression, a clarity emerging through confusion, like the sun breaking through clouds. There isn't, Thomas answered before I could, his voice firm. The Bellamy has policies for a reason. If we want this venue, we follow those policies. Thomas, Rebecca hissed, what are you doing? He turned to her, his face gentle but resolved. I'm respecting my mother's business, Rebecca, the way I should have respected her as a person from the beginning. Rebecca's expression darkened. This isn't the time to develop a conscience about hurting your mother's feelings. We need to secure this venue. Actually, I said, rising from my chair. I think this is exactly the right time for Thomas to consider what matters to him. And perhaps for you to do the same, Rebecca. What's that supposed to mean? She demanded. It means that a wedding is about more than magazine spreads and social media moments. It's about two people committing to a lifetime together, surrounded by those who love them. If your priority is creating perfect images rather than meaningful connections, perhaps you should reconsider what you're really celebrating. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. You have no right to question my intentions. This is between Thomas and me. Ordinarily, I would agree, I replied. But when those intentions involve asking my son to hide his own mother away because she's too old to fit your aesthetic, well, that makes it my business too. This is outrageous, Margaret Harrington declared, standing to join her daughter. We came here in good faith to book a venue, not to be lectured about our values. Did you? I asked mildly. Because from where I stand, you came here expecting to manipulate the situation to your advantage once you discovered my connection to the property. Richard Harrington's face hardened. I don't appreciate your tone or your implications, Mrs. Sullivan. And I don't appreciate being treated as an embarrassment until you discovered I might be useful, I countered. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Rebecca turned to Thomas, her voice tight with controlled fury. We need to make a decision right now. Are we booking this venue or not? Thomas looked at her, then at me, then back to her. Something in his expression had changed fundamentally, as if he were truly seeing her for the first time. "I think," he said slowly, "that we need to reconsider more than just the venue." Rebecca's eyes widened. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means I'm not sure we should be getting married at all," Thomas replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Not if this is who we become together." The salon fell completely silent. Even Martin, the consummate professional, couldn't hide his surprise. Rebecca stared at Thomas in shock. "You can't be serious. You're calling off our engagement because your mother's feelings got hurt?" "No," Thomas said, the certainty in his voice growing stronger. "I'm questioning our engagement because of how easily I was willing to hurt someone. I love to please someone who—" He stopped himself, visibly collecting his thoughts. "Because I don't like who I've become since we've been together. Because any marriage that starts with hiding family members who don't fit the aesthetic isn't building on the right foundation." Margaret Harrington gasped. "Thomas, you're overreacting. This can all be worked out." "Can it?" Thomas asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Because from where I stand, we've spent the last 3 months planning a wedding that's more about impressing people than celebrating love. We've spent more time discussing color palettes than we have talking about our future together. And I just realized I can't remember the last time either of us used the word love that wasn't followed by talk about some material object or social connection." Rebecca's shock was transforming rapidly into cold anger. "So this is it? You're humiliating me in front of my parents because your mother made you feel guilty?" "No, Rebecca," Thomas said with surprising gentleness. "I'm finally being honest with both of us because my mother reminded me of who I really am and what actually matters." As I watched this exchange, I felt a complicated mixture of emotions: pride in Thomas's moment of clarity, sadness for the pain everyone was experiencing, and a strange sense of vindication that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with truth finally being spoken aloud. The breaking point had arrived. Whatever happened next would irrevocably change all our relationships. For better or for worse, remained to be seen. Rebecca's features hardened into a mask of cold fury. "I need some air," she announced abruptly, turning on her heel and striding from the salon without a backward glance. Her parents exchanged alarmed glances before Margaret hurried after her daughter. Richard Harrington lingered, his expression calculating as he assessed the situation. "Thomas," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You're upset. We all understand that. But don't make a hasty decision you'll regret. Rebecca cares deeply for you." "With all due respect, sir," Thomas replied, "I think I need some time alone as well." Richard nodded stiffly. "Of course. We'll wait for you outside." He turned to me with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Eleanor, it's been illuminating." After the door closed behind him, Thomas slumped into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands. I remained silent, giving him the space to process what had just happened. Martin, ever the professional, quietly collected the tea service and slipped from the room with a discreet nod in my direction. "I can't believe I just did that," Thomas finally said, his voice muffled. "Are you having regrets already?" I asked carefully. He looked up, his expression surprisingly clear despite the emotional turmoil. "Strangely, no. I feel like I've been sleepwalking for months, and I just woke up." He shook his head slowly. "But I have no idea what happens next." I moved to sit beside him. "You don't have to figure that out immediately. Rebecca won't wait for me to figure it out," he said with a rueful smile. "She'll expect an answer, preferably a complete retraction and apology, by dinner." "And is that what you want to give her?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment, genuinely considering the question. A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. I would have apologized, blamed temporary insanity, and done whatever was necessary to keep the peace. He sighed. But now? I don't think I can go back to pretending. Pride swelled in my chest, though I tried to keep it from showing too plainly on my face. This was Thomas's moment of reckoning, not a victory for me. What changed? I asked. Seeing you here, in this place you created? He gestured around the elegant salon. It reminded me of who you really are, who you've always been. Not just my mom, but this incredible, competent person who built things from nothing, who never compromised her values for appearances. He met my eyes directly. And then I had to face how easily I was willing to compromise mine. The honesty in his voice moved me deeply. We all lose our way sometimes, Thomas. But not everyone has someone willing to hold up a mirror and make them look at what they've become. He reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I'm so sorry, Mom, for everything I said and everything I was willing to do. I know you are, I said, returning the pressure of his fingers. But this isn't just about me. This is about the life you're choosing for yourself. That's just it, he said quietly. I don't think I was choosing. I was just going along, letting Rebecca and her family set the direction because it seemed easier than figuring out what I really wanted. I recognized the sentiment all too well. In the years after Jack left us, I'd sometimes wondered if the path I was forging was truly my choice or merely a response to circumstances beyond my control. It had taken time to recognize that even reactions to necessity could become purposeful, choices that defined a life. What do you want, Thomas? I asked. Not what looks good on paper or impresses others. What do you actually want for your life? He stared out the window at the Bellamy's formal gardens, where late afternoon sunlight gilded the ancient oaks. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I want the chance to figure it out without worrying about how it will look on Instagram. The gentle knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Martin entered with an apologetic expression. Excuse me, Mrs. Sullivan, but Miss Harrington and her parents are still waiting in the front drive. They're asking if Thomas will be joining them shortly. Thomas straightened in his chair, his expression resolute. I should speak with them, with Rebecca at least. I owe her that much. I nodded, proud of his willingness to face a difficult conversation. Take whatever time you need. Martin can show you to one of the private sitting rooms if you'd prefer not to speak in the driveway. Thank you. Thomas stood, then hesitated. Mom, would you mind waiting? I'd like to talk more after. Of course, I assured him. I'll be here. After Thomas left with Martin, I found myself alone in the salon, the emotions of the afternoon catching up with me all at once. I moved to the window, watching as Thomas approached the Harringtons' car where Rebecca stood with arms crossed, her body language radiating tension even from a distance. They spoke briefly before walking toward the side garden, disappearing from my view behind a hedge of carefully sculpted boxwood. Whatever they were saying, whatever decisions were being made, I knew one thing with certainty. This day had permanently altered the course of all our lives. I turned away from the window and crossed to the antique desk where Martin had left the venue contracts, still open to the signature page. Running my fingers over the embossed letterhead of the Bellamy estate, I reflected on the strange circle of events that had brought us to this moment. 5 years ago, when I purchased this property, I'd envisioned it as a secure investment for my future, a way to ensure financial stability in my later years. Never once had I imagined it would become the setting for such a personal reckoning, or that its elegant rooms would witness my son's moment of truth about the life he was choosing. Pulling out my phone, I called Diane, needing to share the dramatic developments with someone who would understand their full significance. How did it go? She asked immediately upon answering. Not at all as expected, I replied, giving her a concise account of the afternoon's revelations and confrontations. So Thomas actually stood up to them? Diane sounded impressed but cautious. Do you think it will stick, or is he just having momentary cold feet? I'm not sure, I admitted. But there was something different in his eyes. A clarity I haven't seen in months. Whatever happens with Rebecca, I think he's finally remembered who he is. And what about the wedding? Are they still booking the Bellamy? I glanced at the unsigned contract. That remains to be seen. But honestly, it's the least important question right now. Diane was quiet for a moment. What will you do if they decide to go forward with the wedding after all? If Thomas apologizes to Rebecca and they try to smooth things over? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself. Would I stand firm on my conditions if Thomas ultimately decided to continue with his engagement? Would I risk alienating him again by insisting on my dignified inclusion, or would I compromise to keep peace in the newly fragile relationship we were rebuilding? I don't know, I answered honestly. But I think today has made it impossible for any of us to go back to pretending. Whatever happens next, at least it will be based on truth rather than comfortable fictions. Well, for what it's worth, Diane said warmly, I'm proud of you, Ellie. Standing up for yourself couldn't have been easy. Surprisingly, it was, I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. The hard part was watching Thomas struggle with the consequences of choices he made when he wasn't being true to himself. That hurt more than anything they said about me. Our conversation was interrupted by a text from Thomas. Still talking with Rebecca. Might be a while. Don't wait if you need to get back to the office. I sent a quick reply. Take your time. I'll be in my office at the Bellamy when you're ready. After ending the call with Diane, I asked Martin to show me to the small office. I maintained on the property but rarely used. It was time to think strategically about what might come next. Not just for the potential wedding, but for my relationship with Thomas going forward. Whatever happened between him and Rebecca today, we had crossed a threshold. The hidden advantage of my ownership had been revealed, but the truly significant revelation had been the disconnect between who Thomas truly was and who he had been pretending to be for Rebecca's sake. Now I needed to plan for multiple possibilities. A reconciliation that would require careful navigation of the wedding planning process. A definitive break that might leave Thomas emotionally vulnerable but ultimately freer. Or some middle ground where they attempted to rebuild on more authentic terms. Sitting at the desk in my rarely used office, I began to outline contingency. Plans for each scenario, determined to be prepared for whatever decision Thomas reached. After years of planning perfect celebrations for others, this was perhaps the most important event I would ever help shape. Not a wedding, but possibly its absence and the reconstruction of my relationship with my son either way. Hours passed as I waited in my office at the Bellamy. I reviewed contracts, answered emails, and tried to focus on the mundane details of running my businesses. But my mind continually drifted to Thomas and what might be happening in his conversation with Rebecca. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the meticulously maintained grounds, when a soft knock at the door broke my concentration. Come in, I called, setting aside the vendor agreement I'd been pretending to read. Martin appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Sullivan, Thomas is asking to see you. He's in the main salon. Thank you, Martin, I replied, gathering myself for whatever was coming next. Did the Harringtons leave? Yes, ma'am. Miss Harrington and her parents departed about 20 minutes ago. That was interesting. The fact that Thomas had remained behind rather than leaving with them suggested a significant development. I made my way through the quiet hallways of the mansion, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The Bellamy always took on a special quality at sunset, the warm light through the tall windows, the sense of history in the carefully preserved details. I'd always loved this time of day here, when the business of the day was concluding and the property settled into its natural elegance. I found Thomas standing by the windows of the salon, gazing out at the gardens now gilded with evening light. He turned when he heard me enter, and I was struck by how different he looked. Not physically, but something in his posture, in the set of his shoulders. He seemed simultaneously weary and unburdened. "Hey, Mom," he said simply. "Hey, yourself," I replied, crossing to join him at the window. "How did it go?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. "It's over," he finally said. "The engagement, the wedding, all of it." Though I'd suspected this might be the outcome, hearing him confirm it still took me by surprise. "Are you certain that's what you want?" "I am." He turned to face me fully. When I started talking to Rebecca, really talking, not just exchanging carefully worded statements to avoid conflict, I realized how little of our relationship was based on genuine connection. We were together because it made sense on paper, because we fit each other's idea of what success should look like. I nodded, understanding perfectly. In my own business, I'd seen countless couples who seemed more invested in the wedding as a performance than in the marriage that would follow. "What did Rebecca say?" I asked gently. Thomas gave a rueful smile. After the initial shock and anger, she actually seemed relieved in some strange way. She admitted she'd been having doubts too, but was afraid to acknowledge them because of how much had been invested in the wedding. Not just money, but social capital, career opportunities. "That's surprisingly self-aware," I admitted. "I think we both got caught up in something bigger than ourselves," Thomas continued. "The Harringtons have a way of making their expectations feel inevitable, and I wanted to belong in their world, to prove I was good enough." The vulnerability in his admission made my heart ache. "Thomas, you've always been more than good enough." "I know that now," he said quietly. "Or I'm remembering it, at least." We stood together in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the garden lights automatically illuminated in the deepening dusk. The Bellamy was transitioning from day to evening mode, just as we seemed to be transitioning to a new understanding of each other. "So," Thomas said after a while, "no wedding at the Bellamy." "I'm sorry," I replied, meaning it. Despite everything, I'd never wanted my son to experience the pain of a broken engagement. "Don't be," he assured me. "The right wedding will happen, if I find the right person for the right reasons." He glanced around the elegant salon. "Though I have to admit, it would have been pretty amazing to get married here." I smiled at that. "The venue will still be here when the time is right." "Will you still be the strict owner with all those non-negotiable policies?" he teased, a glimpse of his old self showing through. "Absolutely," I confirmed with mock severity. "Though I might consider a small family discount for the right client." We both laughed, the tension of the day finally breaking. "I still can't believe you own this place," Thomas said, genuine admiration in his voice. "It's incredible, Mom. Everything you've built, the business, this venue. I've been so caught up in my own world that I forgot to really see what you've accomplished." "It's not too late to see it now," I told him. Thomas took a deep breath, as if physically inhaling this new perspective. "So what happens next? For us, I mean." It was the question I'd been asking myself all afternoon. What did come next for a mother and son who had just navigated such a fundamental reevaluation of their relationship? I said carefully, "we start over in some ways, get to know each other again as the people we've become. No pretending, no performing, just truth." Thomas nodded slowly. "I'd like that. Very much." As twilight deepened outside the windows of the Bellamy estate, I felt something shift between us, a new foundation forming, more solid than what had come before because it was built on honesty rather than expectation. Whatever came next, we would face it together, with clear eyes and open hearts. The stage was set for a different kind of celebration than the one we'd originally anticipated. Not a wedding, but perhaps something more meaningful. The authentic reconnection of a mother and son who had almost lost each other to appearances. As darkness fell completely outside the Bellamy's windows, Thomas and I moved from the formal salon to the smaller library, where a fire was already crackling in the marble fireplace. Martin had discreetly prepared the room before departing for the evening, leaving a light supper of sandwiches and fruit on the side table, along with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Does Martin always take such good care of the venue owner?" Thomas asked as we settled into the comfortable leather chairs. "Martin takes good care of everyone," I replied, pouring us each a glass of wine. "But yes, he's particularly attentive when I'm on the property. He's been an invaluable part of making the Bellamy successful." Thomas took a sandwich but seemed more interested in examining the room. The floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the original moldings, the carefully selected artwork that complemented the historical character while adding contemporary interest. "How? Did I never know about any of this?" he wondered aloud. "It's not like buying a historic mansion is a small thing you might forget to mention." I smiled, recognizing the gentle challenge in his question. At first, I kept it quiet because I wanted to establish the Bellamy as its own entity, separate from Sullivan Premier Events. It was a significant risk financially, and I didn't want one business to affect the other's reputation if things didn't work out. "That makes sense," Thomas acknowledged. "But after it was successful, you must have restored this place 3 years ago at least." I took a sip of wine, considering how to explain something I was only now fully understanding myself. "I think I was waiting for the right moment. And then as time passed and you became more involved with Rebecca and her world, it started to feel like maybe you wouldn't be interested, that perhaps you had moved beyond being impressed by what your old-fashioned mother had accomplished." Thomas winced visibly. "I'm so sorry I ever made you feel that way." "It wasn't entirely your fault," I admitted. "I was also protecting myself in some way. The Bellamy represented such a huge achievement for me. This tangible proof that I had succeeded on my own terms. I think I was afraid that if I shared it and you weren't as excited as I was, it would diminish what it meant to me." "I understand that," he said quietly. "Still, I wish I'd known. I wish I'd been the kind of son you would have wanted to share it with." I reached across and squeezed his hand. "You are that son, Thomas. You always have been, underneath whatever temporary identities you've tried on." He smiled at that, a genuine smile that reminded me of the boy who used to beam with pride at my smallest accomplishments. "So tell me everything. How did you find this place? What was the restoration like? I want to hear all of it." For the next hour, I shared the story of the Bellamy, how I'd discovered it was for sale when a client mentioned the historic property had fallen into disrepair, how I'd walked through it for the first time and immediately seen its potential despite the water damage and crumbling plaster, how I'd liquidated investments and taken a calculated risk that had ultimately paid off beyond my expectations. Thomas listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about the business model, the restoration challenges, and my vision for the property's future. It was the most engaged conversation we'd had in years. No pretense, no careful editing of our thoughts, just authentic sharing between 2 adults who happened to be mother and son. "You know what amazes me most?" Thomas said as I concluded the story of how we'd discovered and restored the original parquet flooring throughout the main level. "It's not just that you did all this. It's that you did it without ever bragging about it. You built this incredible business and restored this amazing property, and you never once used it to impress people or gain social advantage." "That was never the point," I replied simply. "I didn't do it to impress anyone. I did it because I saw the potential in something beautiful that had been neglected, and I knew I could bring it back to life. Unlike the Harringtons who see everything as a status symbol or networking opportunity," Thomas observed. "It's so different, Mom. The way you approach accomplishment versus the way they do." I considered this. "There's nothing inherently wrong with being proud of what you've achieved or using it to build connections. The problem comes when the external validation becomes more important than the intrinsic value of what you're doing." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what happened with the wedding planning," Somewhere along the way, it stopped being about celebrating our relationship and became entirely about how it would look to others. The magazine spread, the influential guests, the perfect photos. And somewhere in that process, real people with imperfect faces became inconvenient obstacles to the perfect image. I added gently. God, I still can't believe I went along with that, Thomas said, the shame evident in his voice. That I actually sat there while we discussed keeping my own mother in the background because she didn't fit the aesthetic. People make mistakes, Thomas. What matters is that you recognized it and chose differently in the end. He set down his wine glass and leaned forward. I need you to know something, Mom. Even before today, even before I knew you owned the Bellamy, I was having doubts about the wedding, about Rebecca, about all of it. I just didn't know how to admit it, even to myself. What kind of doubts? I asked. I kept having this recurring thought. Is this really what success is supposed to feel like? Because I was achieving everything I thought I wanted. The high-profile fiancé, the connections to important people, the external markers of having made it. But I felt hollow, constantly anxious about saying or doing the wrong thing. Always performing rather than just being. I nodded, understanding completely. The truest success feels like freedom, not constraint. Like you're becoming more yourself, not less. Exactly, Thomas agreed, relief evident in his expression at being understood. And today, ending things with Rebecca, as painful as it was, felt like taking a full breath after months of shallow breathing. We fell silent for a moment, the crackling fire and distant sounds of night birds from the garden the only sounds in the room. The revelation of my ownership had catalyzed something far more significant than either of us had anticipated, the revelation of Thomas to himself. So, where do you go from here? I finally asked. Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know it starts with remembering who I really am and what actually matters to me. He looked around the beautiful room. And maybe, if you're willing, learning more about the amazing businesses my mother has built. The simple declaration, the acknowledgement of wanting to reconnect with both me and his authentic self, was perhaps the most meaningful revelation of this extraordinary day. The following morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the east-facing windows of the Bellamy's guest suite where I'd spent the night. After our long conversation in the library, it had grown too late for either Thomas or me to drive home, so we'd taken advantage of the estate's comfortable accommodations. It was the first time I'd actually slept in the property I owned, a small irony that wasn't lost on me. I found Thomas already awake, sitting on the terrace with coffee and a plate of pastries that Martin had somehow arranged despite the early hour. Morning? He greeted me with a smile that looked more relaxed than any expression I'd seen on his face in months. Sleep well? Surprisingly, yes, I replied, helping myself to coffee from the silver pot. You? Better than I have in a long time, he admitted. Though I did wake up around 3 thinking about all the people I need to call today. Canceling a wedding involves a surprising amount of administration. I winced sympathetically. I can help with that, if you'd like. I do. Have some experience with event planning, you know. Thomas laughed, a genuine sound that warmed my heart. I might take you up on that. His expression grew more serious. There's something I've been thinking about, Mom. Something I want to ask you. What is it? He gestured around at the beautiful property. Would you consider letting me help with the Bellamy? Not as a favor or a job you create for me, but because I think I could genuinely contribute something valuable here. The request caught me by surprise. In what capacity? I've been thinking about that, Thomas replied, leaning forward eagerly. The Bellamy has this incredible presence, but its online footprint doesn't reflect that. The website is functional but basic. The social media is minimal. There's so much potential to tell this place's story more effectively, not just as a wedding venue, but as a piece of restored history. I considered his words, recognizing the genuine passion behind them. This wasn't Thomas looking for an escape or an easy position. This was him seeing a genuine opportunity to apply his skills to something meaningful. "You'd want to handle the marketing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "If you'd be willing to consider it," he replied. "I'd want to start small, maybe a contract basis at first to prove the concept. I have some ideas about content, strategy that could really showcase what makes the Bellamy special without turning it into just another Instagram backdrop." The subtle acknowledgement of his shifted perspective didn't escape me. Just days ago, he had been planning a wedding designed specifically to be an Instagram backdrop. Now he was proposing something with substance and integrity. "I'd need to see a proper proposal," I said, keeping my tone professionally neutral, despite the pride swelling in my chest. "With objectives, strategy, tactical recommendations, and budget projections, the Bellamy may be my property, but it's still a business." "Of course," Thomas agreed quickly. "I wouldn't expect anything less. I'll put something together this week." "Good," I nodded, satisfied with his approach. "And Thomas? If we do this, we do it properly. No favors, no special treatment. You'll be evaluated on the quality of your work, not your relationship to the owner." "I wouldn't want it any other way," he assured me. And I believed him. We finished our breakfast in comfortable conversation, discussing potential directions for the Bellamy's marketing and ways to highlight its historical significance alongside its contemporary amenities. Thomas was full of ideas, his marketing expertise now channeled toward something he genuinely believed in rather than simply what would impress others. As we prepared to leave, Martin approached with a discreet cough. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's a call for you. It's Mr. Harrington." Thomas and I exchanged surprised glances. "Richard Harrington?" I confirmed. "Yes, ma'am. He's quite insistent on speaking with you." I sighed, not particularly wanting to engage with Rebecca's father after yesterday's confrontation. "I'll take it in the office." Thomas touched my arm. "Would you like me to come with you?" "No need," I assured him. "I can handle Richard Harrington in my office." I picked up the phone with professional composure. "Eleanor Sullivan speaking." "Eleanor," Richard's voice was all smooth business charm, as if yesterday's tension had never occurred. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "What can I do for you, Richard?" I asked, bypassing the pleasantries. He cleared his throat. "I understand Thomas has made a rather impulsive decision regarding his relationship with Rebecca." "That's between Thomas and Rebecca," I replied neutrally. Of course," he agreed too quickly. "Young people sometimes act hastily in emotional moments. I'm sure after some reflection, cooler heads will prevail." "Is there a specific reason for your call, Richard?" I prompted, not interested in his diplomatic maneuvering. "Actually, yes. Despite this temporary situation, our family remains very interested in the Bellamy as a venue. My wife and I are planning our 30th anniversary celebration next year, and we'd like to discuss booking the property." The request was so unexpected that for a moment I was speechless. After all that had transpired, their disdainful treatment of me, the broken engagement, the tense confrontation, Richard Harrington was still angling to use my venue. "That's an interesting request," I finally managed. "We've always appreciated fine historical properties," Richard continued smoothly. "And now that we understand your connection to the Bellamy, we're even more interested in supporting your business venture." The transparent attempt to curry favor was almost laughable. Yesterday I had been an embarrassment to be hidden away. Today I was a business connection to be cultivated. I could have rejected his request outright. I could have reminded him of his previous behavior, or questioned his sudden appreciation for my business venture. I had every right to the petty satisfaction of turning him away. But as I looked out the window at Thomas, waiting for me on the terrace, Thomas who had found the courage to choose authenticity over appearance, substance over status, I recognized an opportunity to demonstrate the values I had raised him to embody. "The Bellamy would be pleased to host your anniversary celebration, Richard," I said calmly. "Martin can send you our standard contracts and policies. I'm sure you understand that all our usual terms will apply." There was a slight pause, perhaps as Richard absorbed that there would be no special treatment despite his obvious attempt to leverage a connection. "That would be acceptable. Thank you, Eleanor." "You're welcome. And Richard, I hope your celebration is everything a 30th anniversary should be. A genuine reflection of your relationship and the life you've built together." After ending the call, I rejoined Thomas on the terrace, where he waited with curious eyes. "What did Richard Harrington want?" he asked as we walked to our cars. I explained the anniversary booking request, watching as Thomas's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "You're letting them book the venue? After everything?" I smiled, keys in hand. "The Bellamy is a business, Thomas. And sometimes the most powerful position isn't in refusing people what they want. It's in treating them with the dignity they failed to show you." As we drove away from the Bellamy estate, I caught Thomas watching me in his rearview mirror, a new respect in his eyes that had nothing to do with discovering I owned an elegant historical property and everything to do with witnessing grace in action. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead in rebuilding our relationship, we had already laid the most important foundation: mutual respect based on who we truly were, not who we pretended to be. News of Thomas and Rebecca's broken engagement spread quickly through their social circles. For the first week, Thomas's phone buzzed constantly with messages, some expressing genuine concern, others thinly disguising curiosity about the dramatic development. He handled it all with a grace that made me proud, never speaking ill of Rebecca or the Harringtons despite their treatment of me. Rebecca herself maintained a dignified public silence, though I heard through industry connections that she had already begun dating a promising young attorney at her firm. Whether this was a rebound relationship or evidence that her heart had never been fully invested in Thomas, I couldn't say. What mattered was that Thomas seemed genuinely unbothered by the news. "Are you okay?" I asked him when he mentioned hearing about Rebecca's new relationship. "Surprisingly, yes," he replied as we reviewed his marketing proposal for the Bellamy over lunch in my office. "If anything, it confirms what I already suspected. What we had wasn't particularly special or irreplaceable." 2 weeks after the confrontation at the Bellamy, Thomas officially submitted his comprehensive marketing strategy for the estate. It was professional, thorough, and showed genuine insight into how to position the property's unique qualities without sacrificing its integrity. I approved it with only minor revisions, and we established a 3-month contract to implement the initial phase. Working together professionally revealed new dimensions of our relationship. I discovered Thomas had a remarkable eye for visual storytelling and a genuine appreciation for historical details I'd thought he'd find boring. He found that I was more tech-savvy and open to innovation than he'd assumed, readily embracing his suggestions for virtual tours and interactive historical timelines for the website. The first true test of our new professional and personal relationship came when Modern Luxury Weddings, the magazine that had been scheduled to feature Thomas and Rebecca's wedding, contacted the Bellamy about doing a property feature instead. "They still want to photograph the venue, just without you and Rebecca as the couple," I explained to Thomas, watching his reaction carefully. "They're doing a spread on historical properties being used for contemporary celebrations. I wanted to check with you before accepting." Thomas considered this, then smiled. "You should definitely do it. The Bellamy deserves the recognition, and honestly, it's kind of perfect. They'll be showcasing the substance of the place rather than using it as a backdrop for a fabricated image." His response confirmed the transformation I'd been witnessing over the past weeks, a genuine shift in values that prioritized authenticity over appearance. The magazine shoot took place on a perfect autumn day, with stylists arranging elegant table settings in the gardens and photographers capturing the play of light through the historic windows. The editor, who had originally been so interested in Thomas and Rebecca's modern, youthful aesthetic, now fawned over me as the visionary, owner who had rescued and reimagined the historic property. "You've created something truly extraordinary here, Mrs. Sullivan," she gushed as we toured the grounds. "The way you've honored the history while making the space functional for contemporary needs is exceptional." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the compliment that would have been directed elsewhere if events had unfolded differently. The Bellamy's story deserved to be preserved and continued. Thomas, who had taken the day off from his regular marketing job to help coordinate the shoot, caught my eye across the garden and raised his glass in a subtle toast. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The magazine that would have eliminated me from my son's wedding photos was now featuring me as the centerpiece of their story. Sometimes recognition comes in ways you never anticipate. The weeks following the magazine shoot brought a flurry of activity to both the Bellamy estate and Sullivan Premier events. Thomas's marketing strategy was already showing results, with engagement on the Bellamy's social media accounts increasing dramatically and inquiries about bookings up nearly 30%. My event planning business continued to thrive, with several high-profile holiday events on the calendar requiring my personal attention. Despite our busy schedules, Thomas and I established a new tradition of Sunday dinners. Nothing elaborate, just a few hours each week dedicated to reconnecting. Over a meal and conversation. Sometimes we cooked together in my kitchen. Other times we tried new restaurants or ordered takeout. The content of the meal mattered less than the consistency of the connection. On one such Sunday in early December, as we lingered over coffee and the remnants of a homemade apple tart, Thomas broached a subject we'd been circling for weeks. "I've been thinking about holidays," he said, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with one finger. "Christmas is coming up, and I was wondering if you'd mind if I invited Dad to join us." The request caught me off guard. Jack Parker had been minimally involved in Thomas's life after leaving us, appearing for occasional birthdays or graduations, but never maintaining any consistent presence. I'd long ago moved past the anger and hurt of his abandonment, but we'd had little contact over the years. "When did you last speak with your father?" I asked carefully. "About a month ago," Thomas admitted. "After everything happened with Rebecca, I found myself thinking about him, about choices and consequences, and what kind of man I want to be." He met my eyes directly. I called him. We had a long talk. "I see," I said, processing this information. "And what prompted the desire to have him for Christmas?" Thomas considered the question thoughtfully. "Part of it is selfish. I don't want to be alone for the holidays, and you're the only family I have besides him." "But honestly, Mom, it's more than that. This whole experience with Rebecca and the Harringtons made me realize how much I've been defining myself by external things. Status, appearances, other people's expectations. I want to understand my own story better, and Dad is part of that. Story, for better or worse." I nodded slowly, acknowledging the maturity in his reasoning. "And how would you feel if I said I wasn't comfortable with the idea?" "I'd respect that," he replied without hesitation. "Your feelings matter to me, a lot more than they did a few months ago, I'm ashamed to admit. If having Dad here would be painful for you, then it's not worth it." His consideration touched me deeply. The son sitting across from me now, weighing my feelings alongside his own needs, was worlds apart from the young man who had been willing to hide me away for a magazine spread. "I think," I said after a moment's reflection, "that I would be okay with Jack joining us for Christmas dinner. Not the whole day, perhaps, but the meal itself." Relief and gratitude washed over Thomas's face. "Really? You'd be willing to do that?" Yes, I confirmed, surprising myself with how certain I felt. I've long since made my peace with your father's choices, and if reconnecting with him is important to your process of self-discovery, then I support that. Thomas reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you, Mom. That means more than I can say. That evening, as I placed our coffee cups in the dishwasher after Thomas had gone, I reflected on the strange journey of the past few months. What had begun as a painful revelation of my son's willingness to marginalize me had transformed into a deeper, more authentic relationship than we'd had in years. The broken engagement that had seemed like a disaster had instead created space for genuine growth and reconnection. The reconciliation wasn't just between Thomas and me, I realized. It was also Thomas reconciling with himself, with his true values and identity beyond the carefully curated image he'd been cultivating. And perhaps now, he was ready to reconcile with the complicated legacy of his father as well. Life rarely follows the paths we expect, but sometimes its unexpected turns lead us exactly where we need to go. Christmas arrived with a light dusting of snow that transformed the Bellamy estate into something from a holiday card. Though I wasn't hosting my personal Christmas celebration there, I'd stopped by early that morning to ensure everything was prepared for the small corporate party booked for later that evening. Standing in the grand foyer, watching as staff artfully arranged poinsettias and evergreen garlands, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. What a year it had been. From the pain of Thomas's rejection to the dramatic confrontation, to the surprising reconciliation that had followed. By mid-afternoon, I was back at my home, putting the finishing touches on our Christmas dinner. Thomas had offered to pick up Jack, a thoughtful buffer that gave me time to prepare myself for seeing my ex-husband after so many years. When they arrived, I was struck by how much Jack had aged, his once dark hair now completely silver, lines etched deeply around his eyes. Yet there was something softer about him too, a humility that hadn't been present in the ambitious young man who had found family life too constraining. Eleanor, he greeted me with genuine warmth. Thank you for having me. Your home is beautiful. Thank. You, Jack? I replied, accepting the bottle of wine he offered. It's good to see you. And surprisingly, it was. Whatever anger or hurt I had once harbored had long since transformed into something else. Not quite forgiveness, perhaps, but acceptance of a shared history that had shaped all our lives in ways we couldn't have predicted. Dinner passed more comfortably than I would have imagined possible. We avoided contentious topics, focusing instead on Thomas's new marketing work for the Bellamy, Jack's recent retirement from sales, and my expansion plans for Sullivan Premier events. As we finished, dessert, my mother's traditional Christmas pudding, Jack grew more reflective. I want to say something, he began, setting down his fork. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but leaving you and Thomas was by far the greatest. I told myself I was too young, too restless for family life. The truth is, I was simply too selfish. Thomas and I exchanged surprised glances at this unexpected candor. Eleanor, Jack continued, watching what you've built, your business, this beautiful home, and most importantly, raising our son to be the man he is today. I'm in awe of your strength and dignity. You did what I couldn't, and you did it with grace. Thank you, Jack, I said simply, touched by his sincerity despite the years of absence. He turned to Thomas. And you, son. The way you've handled this recent situation with your engagement, making the hard choice to step back rather than continuing down a path that wasn't right for you, that takes courage. A different kind of courage than I had at your age. Thomas nodded, visibly moved by his father's words. I had a good example in Mom, he said. She taught me that integrity matters more than appearances. It just took me a while to remember that lesson. After Jack left, Thomas helped me clear the table, both of us quiet with our thoughts. That went better than I expected, I finally said, handing him a plate to dry. It did. Thomas agreed. Thank you for making it possible. You know, I mused. A year ago, I never would have imagined the three of us sharing Christmas dinner. A year ago, I was busy trying to impress people who didn't actually care about me, Thomas replied with rueful self-awareness. Funny how things change. Life rarely follows the path we expect, I said. But sometimes the unexpected turns lead us exactly where we need to go. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how what seemed like a disaster, you revealing your ownership of the Bellamy, my broken engagement, turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. The moments that challenge us most often contain the greatest opportunities for growth, I observed, passing him another dish. That's the kind of wisdom I should have been listening to all along, Thomas said with a smile. Instead of worrying about how things looked on Instagram. We finished the dishes in companionable silence, then moved to the living room where gifts still waited under the tree. But the most valuable gift had already been given, the restoration of our relationship, more authentic and resilient than before. Sometimes the most important lessons come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. My son had said I was too old for his wedding, never knowing I owned the venue. But in that painful moment had been the seed of something precious. The chance for both of us to remember who we truly were and what actually mattered. Age, I reflected as Thomas handed me a beautifully wrapped package, wasn't a liability after all. It was wisdom earned through experience, the kind of wisdom that knows appearance is fleeting, but character and connection endure. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.